Welcome to Shaken and Disturbed, everyone. It is just Father God here today. Mother God is off doing, probably not sending the Christmas gift that he promised me months ago, as now we are well into February. But I am going to take this one solo today because I am really excited to talk to my guest today. We've got Shannon Evangelista here, as well as Tim McConville. Did I get that right, Tim?
Yes.
Okay, good. As long as I did. Two of the geniuses. Tim was actually the showrunner of The Curious Case of and The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. And Shannon Evangelista is one of the creators of this show. One of my favorite shows. I've been watching Natalia Grace actually since it came out. As soon as those episodes hit with the seasons, I definitely binge it. And then when you guys kind of did these six, what could only be described as curious and weird cases on The Curious Case of for ID and Max, once you said cat cult, I was kind of just in it immediately. So welcome to Shaken and Disturbed, you two. I'm really excited to talk to you both.
Thanks. Just one correction. So Tim's show ran Curious Cases, but
Gotcha.
I ran Natalia with Alexander Block, different person.
Perfect. Okay, we got two showrunners here. This is perfect. And just so I know, Shannon, before you kind of dove into the media aspect of all of this, you were a federal criminal defense attorney, right? Specializing in organized crime. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I got my starting out of law school. I was, while I was in law school, I was in a clinic. So I sort of acted as a public defender in New Orleans. I went to Tulane Law. And then after that, I went to New York City. I did federal defense, specializing in organized crime. And then I was a prosecutor in both Orange County and Manhattan DA's office. And I specialized in narcotics. So I was in the special narcotics unit.
Just to pry a little bit about that former life of yours, what do you prefer, prosecution or defense?
I really like both. I think like one of my strengths is I can really empathize with both sides of it, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of, there was a lot I loved about defense. I liked making a connection with my client. It was nice to have an actual human being as a client, but then, instead of the people of the state of whatever, but
right.
Being a prosecutor was awesome too, because you have a lot more flexibility in like which cases you're going to move forward with. And you get to make a lot more of, you can own it. It's like, if you don't feel good about a case or you feel like, the state's burden hasn't been met, then you don't file it. And then, if you feel good about it and you feel like, strong about the case, you can move forward, but you have a lot more independence. Whereas when you're a defense attorney, you just 100% have to defend that person and their constitutional rights. It doesn't matter what they've been accused of. So
so I've sat on a jury before, and trust me, we're going to get into The Curious Case, but I'm just because it's a true crime podcast and we often talk about, I fully believe in innocent until proven guilty. I do believe that's our right. The worst murderers, rapists of the world, I still think those trials need to be adjudicated. Very important. Obviously, there's cases, O.J. Simpson, for example, which, after he died, I think we can all kind of make reasonable assumptions about what went down there. But still, technically, by the court of law in that case, he was proven innocent, and I say with air quotes, but I served on a civil jury maybe about 12 years ago. And, most people, when they get called to jury duty, grumble, hate it, try and defer it, just loathe it. I granted, they got kids, they got jobs, so nothing about that. I don't want to take people's time up, but I do think it's actually important as a citizen, considering we are citizens of this country, to actually know maybe how a jury works, how a courtroom works, whether you're doing it bigger cases or civil cases, criminal cases, things like this. So one of the goals here in this podcast is to actually create better citizens, I think, and better jurors, as opposed to people that maybe go in with, nope, you're guilty based on this headline. Yeah. Do you find that social media has made a positive influence on the criminal justice system, or do you find that it's maybe made more negative influence? And Tim, I'm curious to see if you've ever been on a jury or what you think about this, but Shannon, you can go first if you'd like.
Yeah, I love doing cases. Like, I love trying cases. I tried a lot as a prosecutor. And, one of the big things is you need to really prevent social media and news and media in general from influencing the trial. So voir dire is huge. Like, you have to, really delve in and say, are you going to follow this case? Are you going to Google this case? Are you going to be looking this case up? Like, are you going to be able to give this person a fair trial or give the people of the state of New York or California a fair trial by not, looking at social media and I think like, yeah, a lot of people might lie and say, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And then they do. But when it comes time to make a decision, most jurors do the right thing and they don't consider anything they've heard outside. So it's really just about hammering that home, I think, to prevent it.
Tim, how do you feel about this social media craze, which is helping to solve crimes and bring awareness to crimes, maybe that people weren't aware of, but also totally dirtying the juror pool sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of instances of social media sleuths sort of helping in certain cases, and they're sort of well publicized. I think there's definitely more eyes on criminal cases now because of social media's interest in true crime and these high profile and sometimes even lower profile cases. So if that can lead to sort of a more critical understanding of how the system works, I think that's great.
Well said on both of you. Okay, so we're gonna talk about true crime, given the fact that you both at least have a background in it. What was the case? And I'm imagining you're both interested in true crime as a genre here. You've made professions out of this. Any case that you look back on your time and you're like, this threw me for a loop, got me interested in true crime? For me, I'm 36 and a half. I was born in 1988, and for me, Andrea Yates. I was very young when that case came out. If you remember, she drowned her children in a bathtub, sort of pled the insanity defense. Any particular cases that you guys can remember, sparked your interest, got you into maybe thinking about the criminal justice system or true crime in general?
Honestly, the OJ case I think was
Yeah.
was fascinating because it really was such a massive media story that blew up and just sort of I think really took over cable news and really gave birth to cable news in some respects. And I just remember, people from all walks of life just being so tuned into that story.
Well, that's definitely one of the cases, speaking to what Shannon said about just jurors tend to do the right thing. And obviously, we hope that's the case. We hope that they take in there and they look at all the facts. But, that ESPN doc that came out maybe 10 years ago or whatever, that 8-part kind of massive undertaking of OJ, given the fact that this was sort of a result of the Rodney King trials, some of those jurors said that they were kind of responding to this moment in time, that looking back, maybe they made some excuses for this man that perhaps in the light of day they shouldn't have done, which I find to be interesting because I don't really know if those jurors did the right thing.
Well, that's what Natalia,
And
the Michael Barnett juror, said. Remember? She
absolutely,
said the
absolutely.
same thing. She said that now, like knowing everything that they learned, and she had a very strong sense of remorse
Right.
for voting not guilty.
And that has repercussions that sort of have rippled through so many. I mean, OJ is the trial that everyone mentions. Shannon, what is it for you that kind of got you into the genre, or at
Mine's
least
very embarrassing. I'm sorry. Say that
Uh-oh.
again. I jumped on you.
No, please.
Mine's really embarrassing. First of all, it dates me. I was, I was born in 73.
Oh
So
my God. I didn't realize I wouldn't have had you on this podcast. I wouldn't have, we cut that off at 75. So, we're gonna have to talk to Dina about this, but okay, give
okay.
explanation. Yeah.
So this is embarrassing, but this is true. So for me, and it was Jagged Edge, that movie with Glenn Close, and obviously she was the worst lawyer ever. She like slept with their client, but um, seeing a strong woman be this like hardcore, criminal defense attorney, like I don't know, I was like 10 years old. My parents, yes, they would take me to any movie. It was the 80s. Like we did things differently back then. So
Yeah.
yes, I went to Jagged Edge. And I was just like, wow, I want to be like that. I want to be a lawyer. Like I get to do that. And like I know like now my daughter, she knows that she can be anything. Like, but back then it was like, oh my God, I can be a defense attorney. I can do what she does. So yeah, my
That's
whole
sort of
life was formed in that moment. I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be involved in criminal defense, you know?
when you look at young, impressionable, Shannon back then, maybe with Jagged Edge. What do you think is the biggest difference from what you thought kind of getting to be a lawyer was going to be and to what it actually is?
So, you know, you think of you see, these amazing crime dramas on television, and it is all that. But for me, it's more. Like, I like to have a personal connection with the clients. Like, I had strong connections with my clients that were relying upon me to go in and advocate on their behalf. I had strong relationships with the victims. So, like, you don't realize that there's this whole human relationship element to it. And, like, that is kind of, to me, what makes a job meaningful. But it's also a lot of pressure, like
Yeah.
the few cases that you do lose, they can haunt you. You think about them and you have regrets. That's why being a TV producer doing true crime, it's way better. Like, there's no
Yeah.
hearsay rules. I can ask whatever I want. There's no, like, I mean, I have a responsibility, but at the end of the night, like, someone doesn't go to jail for 15 years,
You'd
it's
hope not. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there is a responsibility. My fiance is a showrunner as well in unscripted, not in true crime, but often I watch documentaries. Let's take earlier this year, there was a Scott Peterson documentary. There was two. There was one on Netflix, I believe, and one on Peacock. And you could tell that one of the documentaries took the lens of Scott's not as maybe guilty as we think he is, or maybe the evidence isn't really there. We convicted this guy based on maybe the fact that he was a shitty husband, cheated on his wife, but in terms of like, hands to body, there's no real evidence of that. Then the other documentary, just as an unbiased watcher, sort of took the face of Scott's guilty, said, this guy's an asshole. Lacey was, absolutely a victim by Scott's hand. She died by Scott. And when you're doing it, and you're sort of presenting the same facts, the same people were kind of interviewed in it, but the way that they portrayed it gave such a different tone. And when I'm watching documentaries, I'm very attuned to what I think the showrunner, the executive producer wants the audience to take away. How do you, especially on unscripted and especially in a crime and maybe a crime that hasn't been, thoroughly adjudicated, which we will cover in the Curious Cases one, how do you approach that? How do you make an unbiased documentary? Because
Well, you know what? I think that the most interesting documentaries, your mind is blown because you don't know what to think. And it could
right.
go a million different directions. And it's like Natalia, for instance. Like, for me, it's about giving people a platform to speak their truth, then obviously corroborating it. And we have a former Ken Maxwell with Hot Snakes. He's a former counterterrorism. He was the head of the counterterrorism office in New York. He vets everything. There's a strong vetting process. And then at the end of the day, it's like, really, you present it, and the stories I choose are not that one-sided. It's very hard to do that. So it's a little easier, and I'll let Tim elaborate on it. But, just based on the kind of stuff we do, it's like, you're kind of like, what did I just see?
Yeah, it threw me for. I'm like, do I feel bad for her or do I hate her? And I don't know.
But isn't that real? Isn't that human nature?
I
Like,
think it is. I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons people also have a hard time sometimes with like he said, she said stories, because when you see, let's just take a random case of maybe a woman being abused and then she goes back to the abuser. Part of you was like, that's kind of you're right, and maybe you're manipulated, but like you're also like choosing this, like you could walk away, and Natalia, you could get out of it, and you want to go back to these people that clearly don't love you, but maybe in your mind that they do. And I'm just like, is anyone at fault or is everyone at fault? Are all of these people terrible? Or, it's such a roller coaster that
I
one took
used
me
to
for.
try a lot of domestic violence, and when a victim would change their mind, I would still try the defendant, and I would actually use their 911 calls, and I would have to be in a situation of impeaching the victim with their former statements. And, it would be the kind of thing where I'd say, well, what'd you have for breakfast? Oh, Kellogg's and this and that, and I wore this. And then, oh, well, what happened when your husband hit you? He didn't hit me. I don't remember. Oh, you remember what you had for breakfast, but you can't remember your husband beating you. And like sometimes, it's so different. But, with those situations, like I do believe there is somebody at fault, like there's a victim who's been physically hurt. I think like, And in the case of Natalia, like there was things done to her that there is no justification for how she was treated, you know? But
Absolutely.
and that's my personal beliefs. But when I put it on the screen, it's like, you know, I'm letting people speak their truth and then I'm vetting it to the best of my ability. And then we're letting the audience decide, you know, and Tim can, I don't want to talk too much. I want Tim to explain it to you.
Yeah, because Tim, we're going to go to the cat cult one in about 2 seconds, but I want to get your opinion on this one first.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think with the Scott Peterson case, it's like with a story that's been told so many times, to retell it, you have to have a hard take, right? And so I think that's in part why we gravitate towards stories that haven't been told, right? Because it is this new thing to examine from as many perspectives as possible, and I think that's how we go into it, right? We want the voices that are as close to the story as possible to tell us about their personal journey, and we want to look at as many of those voices as we can to tell the roundest, most compelling version where you're really contemplating, what happened here and why is this meaningful.
Right. Well, okay, so let's get into I mean, I literally like Natalia Grace like really threw me. Like it threw me for a loop and I don't even like it could have a 900 parts. Like I can't like even having a part 3, I was like, "Oh my God, there's more to tell," because like the last conversation in part 2 was crazy. Okay, so in doing the sort of what I know it's 7 episodes because the cat one was 2 parts, but 6 cases that you guys covered for the curious case of how did you find these cases? Did people submit them to you? I'm imagining there was more than 6 that you had to narrow down. Just walk me through how we chose these cases. Sam, you have the mustache. It was you. It was you.
Well, I mean, it was all of us. It's like, honestly, so much fun. We're all like, oh, what's your idea? And, you know, everybody, all of us together, like, you know, editors and like, we were all just like, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? But Tim was involved in more of the vetting, like in the ultimate decision. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking for super compelling stories that show the messiness of the human condition, right? And that are unusual, that are bizarre and strange, and not your sort of run-of-the-mill true crime murder cases. So we were looking for stories that have that sort of like OMG, quotient, if
Right.
you will.
Were there cases that you really wanted to uncover, but you found that maybe you couldn't tell the story in 45 minutes, or there wasn't enough information, or you kind of had to leave something on the cutting room floor just because there wasn't an accurate way to maybe portray that story? Or did you find that that wasn't the case?
I mean, the casting process always is a huge challenge. It's a super fun challenge to engage with, but yeah, there's always stories where the component parts just don't come together in terms of having the right number of voices to tell a compelling, our story. In terms of specific cases or stories, Shannon, can you think of any? We also kind of have to keep our powder dry
yeah.
because
I'm
because
sure.
there's more to come.
I bet. And we'll get to you guys promoting that. But yeah, anything that you can
I
remember,
mean,
maybe?
it's also cool to be able to like, you know, like a person has had a difficult day at work. They love true crime. They don't really feel like watching a murder, you know?
You want a
So,
story.
but they want a crazy true crime story. So that's kind of why I love this series because it's like you get to have a little bit of all of that, you know, without if you're not feeling up to like something as heavy and, you know, kind of depressing at times. Like,
Yeah, fair. Although sometimes I find that murders can be obviously tragic, horrible. Never, very victim advocate here. Don't believe in death penalty. Big on Innocence Project, but I do sometimes find that those cases can be wrapped up in a neat little bow, and something like a cult never gets wrapped up in a little bit of bow because they're still active members, and you can't. So I want to get to it because I'm kind of obsessed with anything cult related. I will watch a cult doc. The first 10 minutes of anything with a cult doc, I'm like, I could join this. I could be a part of this circle. This looks fun. And then, 15 minutes into it, you're like, oh, no, 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 no. Like, I absolutely could not. But let's take the cat cult, for example, which I often feel like I should be in a cat cult because I'm obsessed with cats.
me too.
And you had this really interesting interview subject. I'm blanking on her name. She wore the cat shirt. gay woman. She was the main interviewee for this. You know, she talks about she was sort of the victim of this cult and the vulnerability of the subjects that you kind of have to get to talk about. What I imagine would be one of the more embarrassing parts, aspects of their life, stories to tell. I mean, obviously, I feel like these people are telling it to pay it forward, to warn people about red flags, you know, signs of danger, manipulation, brainwashing, abuse, scars you can't necessarily see. So they're doing something good. But how do you get someone to really open up about something that, when they're telling it, really shows maybe how insecure they were at the time or vulnerable at the time, that they, you know, it is a little bit embarrassing that, like, you really thought that these cats were, you taken 17 cats and all of a sudden you're going to go to heaven? Like, as a viewer, you're kind of like, you can't possibly believe that, but obviously they do. How do you present that in a way that doesn't make them seem a little nuts?
I mean, I think there's a huge trust building component in all of this type of storytelling. And I think, we work really hard to sort of make it clear that our intention is to honor their story and to get and to get the best version of it. And so in that process of trust building, they get comfortable with you because, sometimes you have to show some of your vulnerability as well. In the case of Mary Lancaster, who's the woman that you were
Yes.
referring to, I mean, she's just such an amazing personality
Loved her.
who has such presence. And I think that in her journey, she went through this arduous process of discovering her sexuality and then coming to this realization about the truth of this relationship with Cheryl. And so for her to come out the other end and to leave, I think she's already done a lot of that hard work, that processing, that synthesis, that's sort of self-examined, right? And so she's done a lot of that work. And so then it's about making her comfortable to really go there to the depth that, that the story sort of demands.
As story, I mean, okay, let's take this example. And for anyone that hasn't watched these episodes, I highly recommend that you watch both parts, specifically of the cat cult one, but all episodes are absolutely worthy and have stories to tell. So it's not necessarily I'm giving away a spoiler alert, because I do think that you should watch this story unfold. But okay, Shannon, I'm going to take for you. You're trying Cheryl in court. What is she guilty of? Like, because a lot of it is volunteering to be a part of this. I mean, I sort of hate to say it because I know that there's psychological manipulation and I understand that there's brainwashing, but how do you prove that in court? Did she do anything wrong by the court of law?
Well, I mean, there's a lot that we couldn't even legally get into. There was a lot of accusations that were made that weren't even in the show. That, it's a little bit of a different standard, like in terms of, when you're in a private trial or whatever, literally, it's the judge deciding what comes in and what doesn't. And so, but with that particular story, I wouldn't even know how to answer that because there was so much, there were so many areas that we actually couldn't go, because, again, like everything's vetted. And if there's not, like, for us, the burden of proof is pretty high in terms of what we're going to put on the air, whereas like, so there's a lot of stuff that, we just aren't going to talk about because we couldn't corroborate it. Like, people say things and they make accusations, but we can't corroborate it or have other, sources corroborating that accusation. It's just not going to get in, right?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you should have a high burden of proof. Yeah. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so like, I mean, she manipulated the trust and faith of her followers, and that in and of itself is not criminal.
Right. It
And
might be wrong. It might be morally incorrect and you're like an asshole, but like outside of that,
I
yeah,
mean,
so
I don't
that
know.
accusation that she asked Rick Madrid to kill her husband,
That's pretty bad.
that's a
Yeah.
crime.
Yeah.
And also about, just victims, like you just have to remind yourself as a viewer that when you're watching this person, not to judge them because like the process of going down the rabbit hole and into a cult, it's insidious and it's long and there's a mental thing that happens to people. And, when they disabuse themselves of those beliefs, like, it's like, let's talk about, the idea that if you masturbate, you're going to burn in hell,
Right.
right? Like, when I worked with the Amish, there was a huge, thing that if you engaged in any kind of masturbation, that was a mortal sin and that a demon was present. So it's like, and this is something that they believe. Now, I'm not saying the Amish is a cult. I'm just saying that when certain beliefs are presented to you over time on an ongoing basis, it stops seeming crazy. So the
Right.
audience can watch this person and say, how did you honestly believe that a cat's going to usher you into heaven? But until you've been in that person's, you know, um, shoes and, knowing that cult leaders target people that are in vulnerable positions
Yes.
and they're parasitic in that way, it makes perfect sense. And a completely logical, wonderful, intelligent person can be, dragged down into believing things that when you watch it on TV, seem ridiculous.
Well, that's like sort of what I always talk about, even in decisions that aren't affecting someone's mental health, just decisions in life, you can know that something is sort of bad for you and
Yeah.
still do it. It's kind of hard to change these patterns. And then you really don't know someone's background. If the people that you trust, aka maybe your parents, these first sort of impressions that you have, anyone in your family, but let's just take parental figures or however we're going to say that. If they're telling you something, these are the first figures that you trust. If they're telling you that you're going to burn in hell because you're gay, for example, like me, why wouldn't I believe that? Like it would be kind of crazy to question that because these are the people that I trust. And so when you're going into these situations like that, you're right. I think these certain cult leaders or manipulators definitely prey on just the vulnerable in that way. Certainly, you're more prone to being manipulated and brainwashed in these types of ways, and it's really impossible to just adjudicate that in the court of law because those are sort of the scars that you can't see. That's the abuse that you really can't see and you can't prove, that's happening in your brain. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's so fascinating. In covering these six specific cases, and I'm sure you guys have a fuck ton more, what did you find was sort of the running theme of the people and the cases that maybe you guys covered?
Wow, that's a good one. I don't know. I would say, the desire and the longing for human connection, I think, is a theme that runs through many of these stories. I mean, the cat cult case, as we were just speaking to, is a good illustration of that, of these people that are just looking for community and looking for connection. And I think that's a thread that ties, I think. What do you think, Shannon?
I don't know. I also think it's like they all have like this um just dark underbelly. And then on the surface, there's just funny, ridiculous stuff as well. Like, I mean, even those cat posters, it's just like, I don't know. I just
I would
love
buy those. Yeah.
that's so like classically hot snakes though, like we just love the outrageous, the outliers, the craziness, the what am I watching? What do I think? Like, because to me, life is not black and white. Like, nobody's all good, nobody's all bad. Like, we all have this area of gray. And like, when you watch even a scripted movie, I'm like, the bad guy is all bad and like he has no kindness in him. It's better if you show the fact that he goes home and or she goes home and takes care of this animal and is like this loving person towards animals, but then goes out and does horrible stuff because that's real life. Because people are not, we're shades of gray, all of us, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I love to do documentaries. I don't, I was sitting on a panel with a lot of, I'm sorry, documentarians and I'm sorry, I was sitting on a panel with a bunch of documentarians and one of the, participants said, well, I don't do things where I give a voice to the accused. Like, I like to give a voice to the victims in the case. And I said, well, then you're doing past crimes because a lot of the stuff we do, we're actually following. And, that goes to my investigative background and we have, FBI agents on our team, like former FBI. But it's like, we don't know what's what. We're following cases as they're unfolding, not knowing what's what. And Tim
Right.
loves that as well. So it's like, it's not so black and white. We represent the shades of gray because we ourselves don't know. We are uncovering it, and then we're going through an investigation and a journey, like with Natalia, and then we're taking you on that journey as it unfolded for us, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And we don't know. We don't always know.
And I think that's a really important point because also sometimes the perpetrator in a given, maybe, clear cut kind of crime also was a victim themselves. Maybe they are a victim of sexual abuse from their parents or their aunt or a friend, and that caused them to kind of respond to life in this way. And that's certainly a running theme that we find in a lot of the, at least cases that we cover here on Shaken and Disturbed, is like, it's rarely the person that grew up, decently well off, straight A's, parents love them, and all of a sudden one day they're just like, I'm just going to kill you for insurance money. Like that just rarely is the thought process so many people, but that is how sometimes the public really sees it, especially look at the Menendez brothers, especially when you grow up perhaps well off or you're the right race, quote unquote, you lived in the right neighborhood, quote unquote. It's hard for people sometimes to see you as victims, and maybe they're not victims, but certainly that is out there. And I think that's an important part of the story to kind of tell with them as we're kind of wrapping up this conversation. What shocked you? Two things, two-parter. What shocked you the most going through these cases? And then what did you both learn after covering these cases? And I'm sure you're still learning a lot, but just from what you're covered, from what we can see, I'm curious to hear from both of you, shocking moments and what you learned.
Mary Day, for me, I was really shocked to learn that one of the daughters had seen Mary's, father, William Hull at the time, dispose of a body. Or it may not have been a body, but it looked like a body. It was like he left with a shovel and a rug, and he dug a hole and came back with nothing. That is not something that I had previously seen anywhere in the media. And to me, that was so compelling that, I was shocked to hear that, like really shocked. And, I know that the police department had really made an effort to go public with that, but former shows that covered it, for whatever reason, didn't put that in the show.
Interesting. Tim, shocking moment for you?
I think just the whole funeral house of horror story
Yeah.
in and of itself, just the core bit that 191 bodies were found rotting inside of this funeral home. Uh, I still can't even really wrap my head around it after, producing a pretty in-depth hour of television on it. It's really hard to sort of comprehend.
Like the lack of dignity for human, I say human life, but still, like I'm rewatching 6 Feet Under, and they're often talking about like, you have to respect these people, even if they're dead, like you respect them, you respect their life. And yeah, that funeral home of horrors was like, I like what person does this? Shannon, what did you learn from covering these cases, if you can wrap it up into a nice little bow for me? Maybe you didn't learn anything because you've been in the courtroom for so long. Nothing surprises you, but what do you think you learned, if you learned anything?
After the Return to Nature show, a lot of the victims' families reached out and they said, they wrote this amazing email to us just saying how this gave them a lot of closure. This really, like, it felt good to get this acknowledgement of how horrible this was. And, it's always like, to me, that just made me want to just keep going and do more. When you get those kind of notes or feedback, it means a lot. And I'm always surprised by that because, you just feel like what you're doing you don't really think it actually is going to help anyone in that way. So when you hear that, it's really a nice thing to learn.
Yeah, I think I'm still lingering on that story as well, and to sort of echo Shannon's note. I think when you can shed light on a victim's journey, who's been through, hell 2 times over, to give them voice and to give them to bring their story to life in a way that hasn't been told before. I think it feels good, and I think that's the type of storytelling that we aspire to.
And I'm assuming you guys are going to be telling more of these stories because I know you didn't cover it all. We often say that true crime and these types of cases are sort of recession proof. If the economy's bad, there's still going to be people doing weird shit somewhere, being victims of something. So anything coming up from you guys, from Hot Snakes, from either one of you that you can talk about and promote on here so we can salivate at these
No.
stories?
I can't like give details yet, but I have a documentary that I have worked on for over 10 years of my life.
Wow.
It's now been 11 years, and Tim is the showrunner, and it it's how I learned about Natalia. There was crossover. Like one of the subjects of the documentary I'm doing actually lived in the same apartment as Natalia on North 11th Street where she was abandoned. And
So that just
I'm
happened to be like you weren't searching, like you were just like, oh, then there's Natalia, and this story also deserves attention. Like you just happened upon that.
well, I was down there. I was like in Lafayette where everything was going down. I was spending all this time.
Wow.
Point is, I'm not allowed to give details yet. It hasn't been announced, but I'm really excited about it because I have worked on this thing for like since 2014.
Is it coming out this year?
I don't know,
God
Tim.
damn it. Come
You
on,
can't answer questions. I'm not allowed.
Tim. Tim, give me something here. Come on.
Don't do it,
Um,
Tim. Don't
we're
bite the
super,
hand that feeds you.
Yes.
we're very excited about it. More to come.
And is it just a very curious story, I'm assuming? Like it's not going to be part of that genre, but the story just
Not
unfolds more.
curious.
Okay, it's
Not
not curious.
curious. It's crazy.
Ooh, the crazy case
It's
of.
not
Okay.
curious. It's crazy. It's straight up crazy.
Wow. Well, for all of our listeners who I'm sure have already binged certainly Natalia Grace, and they're definitely watching The Curious Case of, where can people find you if they want to follow your work or listen to some of your announcements from both of you?
Well, we have a website.
Great.
It's, hotstinksmedia.com. So we post ongoing things there.
And you can find you in Lafayette, finding apparently the depths of the universe in that town. Who knows what you're going to uncover? Tim, Shannon, thank you guys so much for coming on and talking to us about this. I know our audience is really going to appreciate your thorough storytelling, and I really appreciate you kind of giving back to the world, understanding these cases, because I feel the better documentaries out there always make better citizens and better interlocutors and make us a little bit more curious and us a little bit more skeptical. And I always feel like that's very important. You don't necessarily believe everyone. You kind of got to trust, but verify. And that's what I feel like a good documentary is really meant to teach. So thank you both so much for your time today. And I'm looking forward to this decade in the amazing and awakening craziness. I can't wait to hear from you both. So thanks again.
Thank you.
You.